BlackRock closes China equity fund after congressional scrutiny. Biden reveals he talked with China's Li Qiang at G20. Air China's plane caught fire, passengers evacuate smoke-filled cabin. Chinese military aircraft, tanks destroyed in Hebei flooding. It's all covered in today's Understand China. BlackRock closes China equity fund after congressional scrutiny. BlackRock is closing a China-focused offshore fund amid congressional scrutiny over its alleged role in directing U.S. dollars to blacklisted Chinese firms. In a recent letter to shareholders, BlackRock Global Fund's chairwoman Denise Voss said the world's largest money manager will close the China Flexible Equity Fund over a lack of shareholder interest and the investment cost to keep the fund running, which she noted is not in the best interests of shareholders. BlackRock intends to liquidate all assets under the fund and redeem any outstanding shares by November 7. Existing shareholders have the options to switch their investments into another fund, sell back their shares ahead of the liquidation date, or receive automatic payments for the shares when the fund closes down. Opened in October 2017, China Flexible Equity Fund had an asset value of about $21.4 million as of late August. It recorded a negative 16.7% return in 2021, a number that nearly doubled in 2022, to negative 30.5%. The fund closure came just a month after the House Select Committee on the Chinese Communist Party initiated a probe into BlackRock and investment index provider MSCI regarding the alleged investments in Chinese companies the U.S. government has deemed problematic. The two firms together facilitated investment into more than 60 Chinese entities hit with U.S. sanctions over national security or human rights issues, the lawmakers said, noting that their review was far from comprehensive and thus the actual number of benefited Chinese companies is likely higher, according to the House committee. Across 5 funds, BlackRock has invested more than $429 million in such Chinese firms against U.S. interests. One of the top invested Chinese entities for China Flexible Equity Fund is Tencent, a Chinese state-backed tech giant that had aided Beijing in silencing dissent and spreading propaganda through its popular messaging app WeChat. 2 others are state-owned hydropower operator China Yangtze Power and Nari Technology, the country's largest supplier of electric power equipment. In a response to the congressional probe, BlackRock said that it complies with all applicable U.S. government laws regarding all investments in China and markets around the world, and noted that it is one of 16 asset managers offering U.S. index funds that invest in Chinese companies. Across the board, there are growing signs of wariness from U.S. investors toward the Chinese market, the long hope for economic recovery after the regime lifted its stringent COVID-19 policies hasn't happened. Instead, the country faces a slowing economy, with a sharp drop in trade, millions of young Chinese people struggling to find jobs, a housing crisis, and growing tensions with the U.S. In August, President Joe Biden signed an executive order to restrict U.S. investments in China in advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, quantum technology, and semiconductors, citing risks for U.S. national security. Gary Dugan, Chief Investment Officer at the UAE-based Dalma Capital, a global alternative investment platform and an avid China investor, said that for an American investor, there is nothing bigger than the current trade tensions between the U.S. and China. China's regulatory environment also presents increasing challenges to foreign investors. In July, China officially expanded an anti-espionage law that could criminalize regular business activities. Authorities this year have also ordered a raid on Bain & Company's office in Shanghai and due diligence firm Mintz Group's office in Beijing. In May, it told local operators of critical information structure to stop buying products from U.S. chipmaker Micron Technology. During an official visit to China on August 29, Commerce Secretary Gina Raimondo said, "Increasingly, I hear from American business that China is uninvestable because it's become too risky." She said she had made 120 to 150 calls with business and labor leaders in preparing for the trip. Foreign investors have dumped Chinese stocks at a record pace in August as China's economy continues to decline. Data from Hong Kong Stock Connect trading scheme show that sales by offshore traders on the Chinese equity market reached about $11 billion over 3 weeks since August 7. Early in August, HSBC said it had cut its Chinese commercial property exposure by $5.5 billion by the end of June compared with last year. Standard Chartered also reduced exposure to $3 billion, from $3.7 billion a year ago. Biden reveals he talked with China's Qiang at G20. U.S. President Joe Biden revealed on September 10 that he had talked with Chinese Premier Qiang on the sidelines of the G20 summit in India. Biden told reporters in Hanoi, "We talked about stability." As reported by Nikkei Asia, Biden said the encounter with Li wasn't confrontational at all. He added that the U.S. was not looking to hurt China, but China was beginning to change some of the rules of the game regarding trade and other issues. Biden said he hoped to meet with Xi soon. The Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum to be held in the U.S. in November could provide an opportunity. Biden pointed to China's high youth unemployment as one policy challenge facing Xi. Biden said, "This is not a criticism, it's an observation." He added that Xi has his hands full right now. Li led the Chinese delegation to the G20 summit in New Delhi in the absence of Xi. Before the summit, Biden's national security advisor, Jake Sullivan, had told reporters that the White House had no plan for the president to engage with the Chinese premier at this time. Biden said his administration has maintained contacts with the Chinese government even as a meeting with Xi himself has proved elusive. Air China's plane caught fire, passengers evacuate smoke-filled cabin. Passengers were reportedly evacuated from the emergency slides on September 10 after an Air China flight, CA-403, from Chengdu, the capital of Sichuan province, to Singapore apparently caught fire when it arrived in Changi Airport. According to China Daily, the plane, an A320 model carrying about 150 passengers, landed at Changi Airport at 4:15 p.m. with the fire beginning in the aircraft's engine. Wang Fu, a passenger on board, said the flight was essentially full, and a few minutes before landing, heavy smoke began to rise from the cabin. Some guests attempted to get up as a result of the cabin lights being blurred by the dense smoke, while others pulled out their phones to take pictures. Another passenger on board said the engine caught fire and the smoke came from the cabin for 40 minutes when the plane was landing. The cabin filled with a pungent odor, but the source of the odor was unknown, and the crew asked everyone to cover their mouths and noses. Breathing was difficult, and everyone leaned over and covered their mouths and noses with wet towels, barely breathing, said the passenger who did not want to be named. Fortunately, we made an emergency landing and escaped through the emergency exits. In a statement, the Civil Aviation Authority of Singapore confirmed that, mercifully, only 9 of the 146 passengers on board sustained minor injuries from smoke inhalation and abrasions during the evacuation. All 9 crew members on board escaped unscathed. In a statement on its Weibo social media page, Air China said its crew dealt with the emergency according to the airline's procedures but that the cause of the incident was still under investigation. The aircraft was a 4-year-old Airbus A320neo fitted with Pratt & Whitney engines. As air to the cabin is supplied from inlets fitted to the engine, smoke from the burning engine would have been sucked into the air conditioning system which then filled the cabin with smoke. Chinese military aircraft, tanks destroyed in Hebei flooding. The record flooding in China's Beijing, Tianjin, Hebei region in July not only seriously affected local residents but also damaged tanks and aircraft at the Chinese government's military garrisons in Baoding and Zhuozhou. According to internal documents, the government had secretly planned to use the populated Zhuozhou and Baoding areas as floodwater discharge zones to save the newly planned political center of Xiong'an. However, when it came time to act on the plan, authorities didn't send out notifications of the discharge in time, which led to devastating losses among the people, businesses, and the party's military assets in the region. At least 78 people died because of the floodwaters. According to Zhao Lonjian, a former mainland Chinese investigative reporter who currently lives in the U.S., in order to implement the government's instructions of protecting the Xiong'an new area, the new political hub planned by Chinese leader Xi Jinping, authorities proposed an on-site flood discharge plan that would open the river banks in the midstream areas of Hebei province. Citing what his contacts in China have said, Zhao stated, "Premier, Li Qiang thought that the situation was urgent. Zhao added, since she previously made the instruction to protect Xiong'an, Li followed the on-site flood discharge plan. Unexpectedly, the troops stationed there were also flooded. She was furious when he learned that the CCP's elite troops had been flooded. Wang Hua, a local resident who witnessed the devastation, also claimed, the unit that was flooded this time in Zhuizhou is Troop 66289, it's located next to the Zhuizhou branch of the China Institute of Labor Relations and the experimental field of China Agricultural University. It's now called the XX Group Army Tank Brigade, which is the unit that defends Beijing. Because of this flood, their tanks were almost all destroyed. Wang said, there is also an aviation brigade in Zhuizhou, and the flooding there was the worst. It was like a swimming pool, the water poured directly into it, and the terrain is very low. Those aircraft have been flooded and have to be replaced. He added, there is also a Baoding aviation school in the main urban area of Baoding, and the entire military compound was basically flooded. Because of the flooding of military facilities in Zhuizhou and she's discontent, Li offered his resignation. It's been reported on social media. CCP internal documents. The internal CCP documents show that in order to protect Beijing and Xiong'an, Hebei province had already deployed the flood storage area in Baoding and Zhuizhou before the flood. An urgent document was issued on July 29, titled Notice on the Implementation of the Work on Cleaning Up and Remediating Problems that Obstruct Flood Discharge, by the Zhuizhou City Flood Control and Drought Relief Headquarters and the Zhuizhou City River Chief System Leading Group. It emphasized that to ensure the safety of river floods, water-blocking obstacles in all towns and villages must be totally cleared immediately to be ready for floods. On July 30, the Hebei Provincial Flood Control and Drought Relief Headquarters issued a special notice, level document, titled Emergency Notice on the Transfer of Personnel in Flood Storage and Detention Areas, for evaluation. The document was simultaneously distributed to the Langfang, Baoding, and Xingtai municipal governments, and the Xiong'an New District Management Committee in Hebei. Later that day, the Zhuizhou municipal government received the notice from the Hebei provincial government through the Baoding municipal government. However, in the Hebei provincial government's video conference on province-wide flood control on the same day, authorities required all meeting participants to strictly keep the information confidential. As a result, except for a few villages that received evacuation orders 2 hours before the floodwater release, people in most places in Hebei weren't warned. A Chinese official in Hebei who knows about the internal meetings and notices took the risk to inform Zhao in the U.S. 2 days before the flood waters were discharged. Zhao said, with verified internal information, the Hebei Provincial Department of Water Resources reported to Hebei Province to prepare for a flood greater than the record one in August 1996. According to Zhao, officials within the system already knew about the floodwater discharge plans, but that officials had no way to pass that information to the common people in the local area, so he hoped his warning message would be taken seriously on international media platforms. However, people in the Zhuizhou and Mentuga districts in Beijing stated on various channels that the authorities released floodwaters without notification, causing many casualties and property loss. The Chinese government hasn't updated the death toll from the flooding. Don't forget to comment in the section below to share your opinions on today's topic with us. Make sure to like and subscribe to see more interesting topics from Understand China, and thank you for tuning in.